Welcome to South Shore Piano, the official podcast of the South Shore Piano School. I'm your host, Jonathan Roberts, and on this podcast we talk with students, parents, teachers, and other leaders to find out exactly how music education is changing lives every day. My guest today is a local celebrity in the piano pedagogy community, Alison Barr in Hanover. Alison has been an independent piano teacher for almost 46 years. She thrives on the variety, autonomy, and unpredictability that being self-employed and deeply connected to the piano and her students brings. She's also, in addition to being an independent piano teacher, a really integral member of the Music Teachers National Association, serving both on the national and regional levels, and especially on our own board right here on the state level here in Massachusetts. Just a wonderful person, full of vitality, energy, and passion for teaching, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Alison, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
I'm thrilled to be here, Jonathan. What a pleasure. I love your podcasts.
Oh, thank you so much. So I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while to hear the story of the local legendary piano teacher, Alison Barr. So Alison, I'd love to go all the way back to the beginning, if you're up for it. Just the young Alison's beginnings in music and those early fond memories. So yeah, just how did you get started with this piano business?
So I remember being around 5 years old. I do remember very early on asking my parents for a piano. We didn't have a piano. Neither of my parents were musicians or had even gone to college. And they loved music, and I just must have heard the sound somewhere. And that I don't remember where, but begged for a piano. So we got one of those old, big, huge, old clunker uprights that someone gave us, and it was in the basement. So, a kid had to be pretty motivated to go down there into the basement to play the piano. It wasn't, in those days, most people didn't have finished basements. And
Right.
I just loved this. I think it was the sound. That's what I remember. And they found me a local piano teacher, and it went from there.
Okay, excellent. How do you remember what it was like going from just sort of curious and tinkering to actually starting lessons weekly?
So the weekly lessons were very positive. I remember getting a lot of good feedback and a lot of stars and stickers on my pages. The teacher was very young. She was actually in college at BU for music, and she was down the street, literally the neighborhood teacher down the street. And she was lovely. But about 2 years later, my father heard from somebody at our church that I should go somewhere more, let's say, elevated, perhaps, because
Mhm.
clearly I liked to study and I loved practicing, I guess. I mean, later on, I didn't love it as much, but I went to piano willingly. And so he took me to Boston, to New England Conservatory, the prep program, and I auditioned there. And I do remember being there with people listening to me when I went in. And my father didn't know really from Adam what that was going to involve. And he basically committed to the next 10 years of every Saturday, all day long.
That's amazing.
There with me. Yeah.
Now, do you remember what that transition was like from the local piano teacher to, it sounds like somebody said, "Oh, this girl's serious. Let's let's send her to the next level up." What that was like, or to you, was it just kind of continuing the same track?
Think I just remember the sense of place more than any particular teacher, because the teachers were they were all very, very gifted and lovely and fine, but they were kind of a revolving door at that age. It was never the same teacher for any long period of time until I got into high school. But I remember the place, and I remember every recital, I would have a little dress, and I was kind of chubby, but I would have a little, like, taffeta dress and be in front, and always have my picture taken in front of Beethoven in the lobby there, bronze Beethoven, which was, I do remember that, not so much the teachers though. I what I what I remember is being in the chorus. Everyone, it was obligatory, but I liked to sing
Hmm.
anyway. So I remember being in the chorus and going every week to this chorus. And I remember loving that. And I also remember my teacher of theory for a couple of years in a row was a friend and gentleman who's a dear colleague of mine now, Ramon Rivera. He was a graduate student there at that time, and he
Ah,
taught the theory classes. And I do remember his theory classes because he always made it so much fun.
that's awesome. So, do you have a collection of young Allison pictures by the Beethoven statue?
I don't really have many archival photos, a couple, not every single one. My family wasn't the scrapbook type or the photo album type.
I can relate. Yes.
So I do have a couple, and I do remember that, definitely, that feeling of posing and feeling really so proud that people were looking at me and paying attention and they liked my music.
Now, how do you feel like that impacted? Now, obviously, you went into this as a career, but how do you feel like that sort of impacted your childhood, having not only this music thing, but that sort of dedicated Saturday music time?
I remember one of your blogs, Jonathan, and it was about this topic. And it was, I could identify with it so well. I mean, I could do well in school, that wasn't an issue, but I wasn't a sports kid.
Mhm.
I was sort of on this different in this different place, I think, in my mind than most of the kids. I guess, I mean, now I guess you would say I didn't fit in, so to speak, at that point in time. I mean, this was in the late 50s, early 60s that I was growing up, and I was in a suburb of Boston, and it was very conformist. People
Sure.
did a certain thing. And so music and going to the conservatory every week really was I would say, my lifeline, definitely as a kid. No doubt about it. Defined me as a person.
That's so powerful, and I think a lot of people can relate to that, music being their thing and their lifeline and their support when sports and being part of the in crowd is isn't our things, which is not most of our things. I don't even know if there is an in crowd anymore.
I know.
Whatever that is.
It would be completely, I think it would be very different now.
Yeah, I agree.
Just everybody had, the same kind of house, the same kind of car, the same kind of yard. Like, people were assimilating, they were aspiring to all be the same and have their kids be the same.
Reminds me of that. I think it's considered a horror movie, The Stepford Wives,
Oh, yes.
where like all of the houses are exactly the same and everybody's mowing their lawn in the perfect dress.
Right. Sort of
You
like
think,
that.
yeah, wow. So, at what point did you decide? Do you remember if there was a clicking moment as you were finishing high school where you thought, okay, music's going to be my career path?
So I think it was in early high school that I decided I wanted to go into music, either music ed, teaching, or performing, or both. Because I also had an incredibly inspirational music director at my high school. And
Ah,
so he was a piece of the other part of my life where he just kept saying, "You can't do anything other than music." Now, I don't know if today people are allowed to say that kind of thing to kids,
right.
put them into to pigeonhole them. Um, but he was so positive, and he sent me down to the middle schools and the elementary schools, took me out of classes so I could accompany the choruses. I mean, he just did everything in his power to encourage me and give me a special place. And so I think he was definitely um an inspiration to going into music ed, as opposed to like I wasn't that into performing, even though the conservatory really hit on performance a lot.
Sure.
I didn't think it was my natural personality type. Sticking in a room, being in a room for 8 hours with the door closed and then going out and being, like wanting to, I don't know, spill your guts out like in front of all these people.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like when we see a lot of the star performers, that's an aspect of that we don't see, is the sort of personal sacrifice and all of those hours just being alone in a room with the instrument, which on one hand, I think we kind of romanticize that and make
Right.
movies about it and stuff like that. But in reality, it can be a very lonely existence. So I
Yeah.
totally relate to that. And having that opportunity to connect through educating where you can still play, of course, whenever you want, but actually be able to impact lives, I think, in a more intimate
Mhm.
way or a more direct way, has always resonated with me as well. So that's so cool. So you first started as a music education major, is that right?
Correct. My undergraduate is in music ed, and I kept my options open. They allowed me to go sort of doubly major with a choral concentration and a band concentration because I also play the flute and always studied flute right along and studied it all the way through college. And so that stood me in good stead when I went out to look for jobs because as a pianist, you usually go one way or another,
Right.
but I was able to go both. And I taught in public schools in Maine. My undergraduate was from University of Maine at Orono. We had a fabulous piano teacher there and fabulous teachers in general there. Um, and I went out and I did 3 years of public school teaching and I ran back to the piano. It just wasn't it as much joy as it gave having 750 kids a week.
Yeah.
And it was just so arduous and it just wasn't where my heart was and my soul. So that's when I went and decided to go to graduate school in performance because I figured if I went in performance, I would have a really good foundation between the music ed and the piano performance. So I went to Boston University. I spent a year getting ready for the audition because I felt not well prepared, not having had a really strong performance background in college.
I
So,
see. That's so I can relate to so much of that because
really?
it's it's a very similar story to mine. So I did a double in music ed and performance, and I often wish that they made you take the student teaching semester earlier so that you could sort of see what the
What it was
schedule is like. As I agree with you that it's a grueling schedule, which I have so much respect for really good
me
music teachers, but it really is sort of a 60 or 70 hour a week job when it comes down to it, between the hours at school, staying after school to help kids. Especially the music teacher is always the one
right.
expected to stay after school to help kids and stuff like that. And then you get home and you get to grade, maybe get dinner, and then go to sleep early so you can get up at 5 a.m. the
Well,
next
and
morning.
also yeah, and also what I agree that that schedule and also for me, I mean, I put the I in independent. I every institution I have tried to be a part of basically has not wanted me in the end because I just don't again, it's that nonconformist element. I just don't
Yeah.
like the rules and regs of and now I think it's really hard for the teachers. I mean, what they have to do that's not even related to music. Um,
Right.
all the things that they have to fulfill and all the paperwork and I mean, I understand it's a tough system and there are many kids with many kinds of needs, but for me, it's just not for me. I always treasure my ability to call my own shots and make my own way. And as you would probably well know, what you give up is you give up some things like security and kind of you having to create your own infrastructure all the time. And that's what I've worked my life to kind of build for myself. Um,
I love how you said putting the I in independent. That should totally be on your website if it's not already.
no, it isn't.
It's in your personality as well. So it's like the Alison Barr theme, putting the I in independent. So after you were done with college, you taught some other places. No, you taught, so you taught at some community music schools, stuff like that, decided that this isn't jiving. And then you just decided to open up shop. And it's been how long now since the independent Alison Barr piano studio
So
opened?
I always had a private studio on the side, no matter what. But what full time, I have been doing this since full time since 1983. Um, I think that's the right year.
So we'll be celebrating 30 years in a couple years, right? Okay,
And
we'll have to have a special podcast episode just for that.
well, I mean,
That
it's funny because I always measure my years of independent teaching from when I got out of college because I always had a studio on the side, even if I had a public school job, or was at a community music school, I would live somewhere else and have a studio. Um, but yes, full time, 100% independent.
Absolutely. And then
Yeah.
how did you first get involved? You've been a huge influence with MTNA on the national and local levels. How did you discover MTNA and get hooked up with them?
So, when I was at college, so I graduated in 1976. My piano teacher there, Catherine Ann Foley, she's retired but still alive and kicking. She founded the Maine state chapter of um, MTNA, Maine Music Teachers, and she didn't like to do correspondence. So I was her, kind of her, um, I would
Assistant.
say assistant, yeah, correspondent and letter opener. And she basically, I was there at the founding of the chapter and I was a charter member. And from
Wow.
that point on, I, that was it. I was hooked on the idea of maybe because I am independent, but yet that's an institution, but it's not an institution that you have to buy into everything for. You have
Right.
to, you know, conform to everything. And it's an institution that I think I needed very badly because I was going to be so independent. Go
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's definitely such a wonderful organization for all of us independent teachers
right,
out there to be able to feel like we're still part of a community. So we haven't given up that aspect just because we
right,
decided to be
exactly.
independent teachers or start our own schools or whatever. So I love that you hit on that. Now let's talk about the teaching. So this podcast is all about how you love teaching every single hour of every day, and
Yes, mostly every.
and the wonderland that is. Yes. Um, so, um, we have such an impact on lives, and music changes us just as much as it changes our students. I always feel. What are some of the favorite parts, or what have been some of the favorite parts of what you do since you started your independent studio, especially?
What I love about teaching piano is I can always be with the instrument no matter what. I know that sounds very broad and general and vague, but I can always hear the sound of the instrument. So I feel like that's at the core of what I felt when I was 5 years old was this instrument sounds so beautiful. Now, during the pandemic, of course, when we all went remote, a lot of the teachers were like, oh, the sound, it's so terrible, it's so terrible. Of course, we were affected by that. We wanted to try to get the best sound we could get. And I just kept working towards that and saying, I'm going to do the best I can at that. But it's always being with the piano, helping the student find the joy that I have for it. I think is probably what keeps me going through thick and thin is I know that at some point if they stick with it, the piano is going to take over for them because it's that powerful and it's that amazing of an instrument. So I just feel like I'm the facilitator more than anything. I
Yes.
remember when I was in graduate school, my teacher, amazing, Anthony de Bonaventura, he's now not with us any longer, but he said, dear, the piano, he would always say, dear, and he had these beautiful long fingers, and he was just such a genius teacher and pianist. And he would say, we don't choose the piano. the piano chooses us. I'm like, oh, well, I couldn't run away. I couldn't run fast enough. It got me. But I do think that if you can find the way for each individual student, child, adult, beginner, advanced, to keep connecting with the instrument and what it does and how versatile it is, how beautiful it can sound, how amazing it can be, then I think there's the joy in it right there.
Yeah. Wow. I need to go back and listen to this and write some of these things down. They're very sort of Yoda-esque sayings there.
I've been at it a long, long time. I've had a lot of time to think about it, Jonathan.
Yes, I need to start thinking about these things more. Very cool. And then I love what you said about, sort of finding that spark for each student, because you never know what I sometimes refer to it as the way in for students or for families to figure out what's going to be that sort of switch that gets them, excited and hooked on this music and this piano thing long term. Now, you've had hundreds of students over the years. I maybe should have asked you this before the podcast so you could think about it, but I'm curious if there's one story that maybe stands out about a student that you feel that you really sort of made music a permanent part of their life, or that had a major turnaround with you.
I had a student a while back. I don't think piano necessarily turned him around per se. I'm going to change the question a little.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Independent.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Of course, I can't answer a straight question. And his first name is Ryan, and he's now in a residency, an MD program to be an ER doctor.
Wow.
And when he came to me, he was in probably fourth or fifth grade, so he wasn't beginning from scratch. He had already been to a teacher. Um, and his story resonates with me because he will have a stressful life, probably in a lot of ways, being an ER doctor, even though that's his choice and he's very passionate about it. And during the pandemic, I gave my anybody who was an alum of my studio tuition-free lessons on Zoom. If they
Wow.
found out about it, I tried to contact people, and not a lot took me up, to be perfectly honest. But he took me up on it because he was home waiting for his match to get matched with his residency program.
Oh, okay.
And he took several lessons. And I was thinking about the fact that Ryan, no matter where he goes in life, will always be connected with music. And it will be a lifeline for him, and it will be maybe a personal savior for him at some points in his life. Um, and I think he's a standout. Not that I think I saved him particularly in any way. I mean, there are students that I think you can be a lifesaver for, and I probably had those
Sure.
throughout, um, if I were to think about it. But I think for somebody like that, who's going to give so much back to the world,
Right.
to know that in his quietest moments, he can go to his piano. And maybe his darkest moments, he can go to his piano. That means a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Music is always our friend and companion that never goes away in good times and bad. Something we can all remember, even us, especially as piano teachers, I think, when things are hard for us.
Right. Right. That's when we really need to remember it. Oh, yeah, I played the piano. Remember? It's good. It's a good
Like,
thing
yes, we can play too.
to play. Oh, yeah. Right.
Absolutely. You hit on this a little bit, but I'd love to dig a little deeper. So hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, we're in the light at the end of the tunnel phase of this pandemic business. But what has that process been like for you and your students? I think for a lot of us, yeah, it was tough in the beginning, but I think it's been a really amazing example of sort of resilience of people, and how music really does mean enough to a lot of people to deal with the virtual stuff, and even to sort of explore the pros, because there are some things that actually I think work almost a little better online than face to face. But how has that experience been for you and your students?
So I would say that experience has been transformative for me. I never thought at 65 or 6 years old I would have to recreate or choose to recreate. I guess I didn't necessarily have to, but choose to recreate pretty much the way I deliver my teaching, the psychology and philosophy somewhat behind my teaching, even though I tried to maintain my core values as best as I could.
Right.
Um, to learn the whole new field, which I had never done a remote lesson ever before, or thought I ever would, and to embrace something with, I would say, beyond resilience, with an eager kind of curiosity to reinvent. I mean, when you get to be at my point, you're just usually, so many of us are just like, oh, we're happy to just wake up and coast along, rest on our laurels, so to speak. I will never rest on my laurels ever again, because now I'm going to co-share students with my colleague in Texas. I have, all kinds of international stuff going on with students that I will keep. Um, it was a challenge in many, many ways, definitely. But to see the dedication, as you said so beautifully, of families just wanting to make it work,
Yeah.
and coming out the other end so appreciative. It's meant the world. It's just been just a recreation of who I am as a teacher, I would say.
Yeah, I love how you put that. I think in some ways it's been almost like a rebirth sort of thing for all of us. And as you said so well, it's brought the world closer for sure. And I think because we all had to do it, I think for a long time there was this sort of misconception that online lessons are sort of by default inferior, but by just having to do it, we've all figured out our groove to make it work just as well, if not better, than face to face. So very exciting possibilities ahead, I think.
Extremely exciting. And in fact, when I think of all the collaborative possibilities, that makes me very excited, because, what they were probably there before,
Right.
but I personally would have never probably, I mean, it would have taken me a long time to even, to do little bits at a time.
Right.
And I would have kind of had to be dragged, maybe kicking and screaming, thinking,
Hmm.
as you just said, that being one of those people that thought it was just, I would never do that. And now I mean, I'm totally passionate about the opportunities it gives.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Allison, as expected, I would expect no less. This has been such inspiring conversation. Not only for independent, but for inspiring. The one and only Alison Barr. Um, really amazing stuff. I really look forward to your continued adventures and our continued adventures here in the South Shore community. But thank you so much again for taking the time to be on our podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It was a joy and a pleasure.
Thank you so much to all of our listeners. Again, this is South Shore Piano, the official podcast of the South Shore Piano School. I'm your host, Jonathan Roberts, and on this podcast, we talk with students, parents, teachers, and other leaders to find out exactly how music education and the arts are changing lives every day. If you enjoyed this episode, do hit the subscribe button on the podcasting app of your choice, or if you're checking out the YouTube version, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you're among the first to find out about new episodes as they're released. We release new episodes every Monday and Friday. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.